Right, so welcome Matthew Sweeney to the second part of our yoga chat on Advaita. So Matthew is going to try and explain more about Advaita Vedanta and how it might relate practically to your practice, your yoga practice, and your aims and intentions towards it. So neither of us really have a clear idea of where we ended up in the last conversation, but I think, as I remember, it was about accomplishment in practice and acceptance, or how much we're looking for achievement in a material sense in our yoga practice, and this idea that there is nothing to achieve, there's nothing to get, that all we need is to accept what is, or something along those lines. So can we start it from there, Matthew? Do you have a way in from there?
That's fair enough. So I guess if I just start with those two ideas, one is a sense of how we are normally geared in any endeavor, but let's call it yoga practice, to want to improve or get better, or and whether that's physically or psychologically. Personally, I don't think there's such a thing as improvement spiritually. I think that's a fundamental contradiction, and I think that's an important one to address. But if we start with the idea that one of the concepts, or one of the ways most humans would work with yoga practice, is towards a sense of improvement. And that could be just a sense of physical well-being, so physically stronger, more flexible, or just feeling more healthy, feeling more alive in the body, and so on and so forth. And there's various categories we could put with how we go about that. And that, by and large, we would talk about, physical practice, even just, muscular systems, circulatory system, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that. And so I don't think they're exactly mutually exclusive. So just because you're working on one doesn't preclude you from either simultaneously or intermittently working on the other. So I think that's important, because if they were mutually exclusive, to me, that just means more dualism. Dualism in this sense meaning more separation, more, well, it's either that or that or that. And so if you take an extreme, and I don't think accurate, but an extreme non-dual viewpoint of that, it is, well, don't do any practice because it's all temporary and not worth your time. And I think that's taking too much of an extreme view, just as someone who says, and
you're not the body anyway, so why would you endorse the body?
Why bother dealing with that? But that, by saying that you're not dealing with it, by not dealing with it, you're still not dealing with it. And so that, you're no further necessarily, you're not any further along just because you're saying, oh, I'm more superior because I'm doing a spiritual practice. That's just the ego latching itself onto an ideal of what Advaita could be. And you're no better, and probably a little worse, simply because you want to think of that as superior. Just as anyone who says, I'm doing a spiritual practice, as though that means anything. Because it's like,
can I just interject that?
That concept itself is almost mutually exclusive, because to say anything specifically is more spiritual than something else.
Right.
I think that muddies the water. It just makes things more confusing. So
there's something to do with a healthy body, kind of needing a healthy body for a healthy mind, right? I mean, like I was thinking this morning, like Socrates did his lectures in the gymnasium for a reason, because it was related, like the health of the lucidity of the mind is related to the whole system.
Absolutely. And if the more unhealthy you get, and the more in pain you get, the more anxiety, the more neurotic behavior, all of that can coincide. Now, that doesn't mean to say if you're sick that you can't. And I've met I'll give an example here of one of my very early yoga teachers who was suffering chronically from extreme arthritis. But her way of dealing that was incredible. I met her as a very young man, and later on as a professional yoga teacher, new yoga teacher, and she came and did a workshop with me. It's a very peculiar situation where, you have your teacher coming into your own. It's very embarrassing in a way, but her quietness and calmness and centeredness, and she could have claimed that it was a lot of that was because of her illness. Now, I thought that was a very interesting.
She claimed that.
Yeah, she sort of said, well, in a way, it's because, not exactly, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the way she said was the illness that caused me to really stop and slow down. to really have a look at, well, what's really important in my life. And you know, anyway, she had her own view on that. So I thought that was interesting. So I said, I guess I can use that as a bit of a metaphor, just because we're working on certain things in time, and let's call this horizontal time. So it's time where we work on certain things, and it's a part of life. You're born, you live your life for however long, and at some point, you know, that falls away and you die. And so we've all got to face that and deal with that somehow. And so we want to make our time productive. We want to feel like we're progressing and achieving certain things, and whether that's a house or a sense of personal accomplishment, fulfillment, I mean, family, I mean, all of these things in different ways will be important to us. And so I think it's really important to work on that. But a part of that, at the same time, what's also happening simultaneously is what we would call vertical time, which is the present moment. Now, with horizontal time, it's much easier and simpler to focus on that because it's apparent. Even though in many ways we could say from a present point of view, you know, past and future don't exist, but at the same time, we're aware of their impact, and their impact of past and future is huge. It's because to say that it doesn't exist, then you're just trying to throw that out and say, well, fuck it, I'm just going to be present and nothing else matters. And for the purpose of practicing meditation or Advaita, in a way that's important, but it's not an arbitrary throwing out just to go, well, I'm getting rid of past and future, because as soon as you get up and walk around, well, at some point you're going to have to pay your taxes. If you don't work, well, you're going to have to deal with, how am I going to eat? And so you've got to deal with time, which is, you know, food in your mouth, money in the bank, et cetera, et cetera. And those things, one way or another, have to be dealt with. And so, but
yeah, and even for learning's sake, there's certain methods that one would need to kind of learn, even if the question is just simply remembering, who am I? The classic, you know, Advaita meditation, right? You still have to use time to remember that, or, you know, like, right, even if that was the only sense of learning that you would need.
Right. And so what's important here, if we're going to talk about, if I'm going to talk about what philosophically, how Advaita would view vertical time, which is the present moment, and how we go about exploring that, that doesn't exclude us from also working with horizontal time, because they're both happening to us at the same time. The impact of horizontal time as well. You're responsible for your body. You're responsible for the words that come out of your mouth. Perhaps you're responsible for a family or a job or whatever it is, all the responsibilities that you've got. And a lot of that will, you know, show up in horizontal time as, well, I've got to do all this shit. And some of it you'll like, some of it you won't like, normal life stuff. In vertical time, when we start looking at that clearly, a lot of the factors of horizontal time should naturally fall away, just while we're in that style of practice. And it's important that they do fall away, because we can get then clarity on the things that are more important. I'll use another analogy here, which I quite like. It's a little bit like this. When we get caught up in horizontal time too much, a lot of the apparent problems there are really real problems other than what you make up here. You know, we're all aware of that we make our own problems worse. So, for example, all of the little nitty-gritty problems that you have, like, shit, I forgot to put the bins out. Oh, I brought the wrong bag to work. It should have been that bag, and I didn't have my right gadget in that bag, and so I forgot that thing. You know, all the things that, I made this mistake. All those things that bug us. When you look at any of those and you just go, you know what, it's not a big problem. There's, you know, getting all tied up and caught up in that and reactive to it and completely, you know, charged about those things. If you really look at those little problems that are occurring all the time, you stub your toe, and rather than going, you know, shaking your fist at the world, the universe, going, I've stubbed my toe, my life is horrible. You know, you look at it, any reasonable human will just start looking at that and just, you have a chuckle to yourself and go, okay, there's no need for me to keep overreacting about that. So that's not all the small stuff.
Does there need to be some? I think I can just say, often people worry about, like, if I don't have that sense of urgency or that sense of, that needs to be done, that needs, this kind of advice message, they kind of take, well, I won't do anything then. If there's not any kind of anxiety around it, like, oh, that needs to be packed, that needs to be done. I'll just sit back and go to bed and drink gin all day,
Right. No, but see, it's not that you see, because you still have dharma, you still have responsibility in life to fulfill whatever you need to fulfill, partly just to feel fulfilled yourself internally, just to feel satisfied and engaged with the world. If you just lay in bed and smoke marijuana if you want, or just
whatever your
there's a certain point of doing nothing where you will just you'll go crazy. Like you need to get off your ass and do something so that you feel valuable. And part of that is taking responsibility in a good way, like working in whatever capacity. It doesn't necessarily mean earning money. It means, whether it's making art or having a job or raising a family or being in the garden, whatever your duty is, well, you do that.
And you believe in it, because that would also kind of coagulate you as a kind of definite self, wouldn't it? Whatever you're, kind of getting involved in your duty would kind of presuppose that you kind of believed in it. Like, I believe.
Yes, but we also understand on some level, we understand the value in that, because when you have greater responsibilities, and I don't just mean a family, I just mean whether it's in your work or, for the land that you're caring for, or whatever the responsibility is, that's such a wonderful thing. And people, when you start practicing in this way, with whether it's Advaita or any other form of consciousness practice, and it could be through psychotherapy, it could be through, all sorts of ways we do, but we're talking about Advaita for this purpose. A couple of things happen, and I'm just talking about the nitty-gritty stuff. So when we keep smacking into that, one of the practices that happen with that is you just start lightening up about things that really, they might annoy you, and they don't go away just because you're practicing Advaita Vedanta. You don't all of a sudden stop feeling pain. You don't all of a sudden stop doing things because, well, now I'm just going to lay in bed all day because I'm Advaita practice. It doesn't work that way. You still do your duty, do your responsibilities, but we start slowing down enough that the things that, all the little things that normally or in past may have irritated you and completely thrown you off, some reaction or whatever, you just start going, it's okay. Oh, I stubbed my toe. How funny. It hurts. Throb, throb, throb. And then you walk on or limp on, and you don't, and so maybe someone else saw that happen to you and they laugh, and you get upset with them. And it's like, oh, no, it's okay. They laughed at me. Yeah, it's funny. And you laugh with them all of a sudden because you go, yeah, that's really funny. Look at me. I looked so foolish stumbling the way I did. And so we start to reframe our position fundamentally, because one of the issues is when we get locked into horizontal time too tightly, what happens is we sort of start putting the blinders on. We get tunnel visioned into, because with horizontal time, what we start looking at is, this is what I want next. This is what I want in 5 years. And if I don't get that, I'm pissed. I'm upset. Every plan we make doesn't quite work out. And I mean every plan, but you make some plans and just see what happens. And the fun part is when it doesn't work out exactly. Now it's disheartening if your plans never ever work out in any way, shape or form, and you keep feeling like, but possibly you're not making the right plans. You've got too big an idea about what should happen. And people, it's like people trying to go from being this normal person and I want to be a superstar, and they want to be a superstar in 5 minutes. This may be, a curse of the current generation. Who knows, right? But there's a sense of wanting achievement, but in a short period of time. And it's like, well, no, that's a terrible curse, because you won't have the tools to handle it. And you may get success in 10 minutes, but it'll be gone 10 minutes after. And the level of pain you'll have in that case will be hideous. And so if you build up your responsibility over a period of time, then your level of success will meet that. So I guess a part of what I'm saying is if we're not so locked into horizontal time, what we can, and it's still occurring and I'm still working on it. I've got personal goals for myself and my life. And I think that's fair enough. But here's the thing, here's Advaita. in the present moment, when we start noticing that, most of the difficulties of the past, future kind of issues start falling away, and you start to notice, well, when I'm in this present moment more clearly, more relatedly, more openly, I'm not so concerned both with the little stuff that I mentioned earlier, just the things that normally just are irritating. Oh, that's like, well, it's small. Why be bothered by it? And you start being open to inviting it. Oh, I stubbed my toe. Oh, and you really enjoy that. Oh, that hurt. Oh, but you're sort of laughing at the same time.
So what's the motivation for the goals then? What's the motivation for the plans and the wish for progress?
Because
if you're also trying to be in the present, is there no contradiction there?
Well, no, not necessarily. And so this is where the non-dual idea comes in. And let me just finish this piece, and because we need to come back to this, because it is important. Because otherwise, it seems like those two things are separate, but they're not, because the present moment is always giving us, in that moment, a view of the past and giving us a sensation of moving into the future. And every present moment gives us that. And so the present moment is not fundamentally, inextricably divorced from past and future. It's constantly allowing us to look back, and it's constantly allowing us to look forward. The problem is, if you only ever jump from past to future, you're probably going to run into your own problems, because you'll get upset by stuff terribly easily. And even some of the best, businessmen, like them or not, even people like Elon Musk and so on, and you hear certain ways that they speak, and there's a certain philosophy that goes with it, which is often about just trying to see things in the moment as it is. And then you can discard what's not useful and focus on what's useful. And they've got real sharp goals. Men and women who are doing this, they've got very clear goals. But they also seem to have, not that they really practice meditation, some of them do, in fact, but there's a meditative quality to what they do, because what they have to be super clear about getting rid of the things that are unimportant. Now,
I can see that. So it's not like you're just living in the present, you're relating it to past and future, but you're not living in the past or the future. Exactly. You're living the present in relation to the past and future.
If you live in the present moment and you exclude even the idea of past and future, you're kind of splitting yourself off from all that you are, because past and future have an absolutely undeniable impact. And to then exclude that from the field is like, it's like, well, I'm going to give another analogy in a moment, but it's, it's like trying to separate mind and body. And we know that they're different. We know that they function differently, because I'm thinking, and then we know the body, the body's happening and I'm breathing and the heartbeat's going. But you try to get those two separate, you'll be dead. It's a foolish idea. So we know that they're also linked, even though their functions are really quite different. But we know they exist, right? We've got a mind, we've got a body. Well, in a sense, this is a little bit similar. I won't say how I would say which is which, because that's not really a close analogy. But the point being that just because we can say it's very important in meditation and Advaita to practice just being present and let go of everything else, that doesn't still stop you being able to reference past and future, because, they've occurred. Well, at least past, we know that's occurred, but we know there's a sense of, I have a direction and I'd like to move into that. Even if it's a direction of moving into more awareness on a non-dual level, that's still a direction. It's a preference, it's a connection. So, but in the present moment, if you, even just right now, as I'm talking, anyone listening to this, if you or I just sit here and just connect, whether to each other or just to our own inner functioning in the present moment, a lot of the things that we might be distracted by will just naturally fall away, whether it's the sound or a sight, like even just closing your eyes is a part of that. But what we start to notice in the present moment is there's nothing that I can say I can really bear down and fix on unless I then jump to past or future. So, because in the present moment, there's a sense of if we're both doing this now, there's a sense of rather than contraction, there's a sense of expansion. And that's true of anyone who just sits and looks at themselves or looks at how you're experiencing in the present moment. So even if you're feeling a contracted experience of anxiety or heartbeat, if you just sit and be present with it, that almost automatically there's a sense of, even though the anxiety may not fundamentally change, but the sense of spaciousness within it or around it starts to become apparent. And that's the fundamental nature of the present moment, is it's, for want of a better term, infinite.
So what if someone says, I mean, I know that I was reading something recently that someone said, well, if I'm sitting in the present moment, I feel nothing, and then I feel existentially anxious because of that sense of nothingness.
No, right. This is a perfect statement. And then I would say you're on exactly the right track with this happening. I don't want to confirm the anxiety, but the anxiety is a natural phenomenological response of a combination of things: your mind, your ego, and your nervous system. Because those things don't want to die. Healthy response, because when you feel nothing, there's a sense of I'm losing myself is disappearing. And it's the self that you're attached to, which isn't particularly real anyway, because most of that is a personality that you've accumulated. Some of it's coming from your DNA patterning, and that's normal. It's a natural function to have some mirroring from your parents, biologically, one way or the other, or just even if you didn't have, if you were an orphan or something and you got adopted, but the imprinting that you get at an early age from whoever you were around at a young age. And so all of those, and we don't need to be concerned there with positive or negative. All of those things that have created the personality are also something that we can notice in the present moment as just being quite fluid. They're not fixed. And that sense of anxiety that comes from that is not dangerous innately. Now, you may feel a bit of threat, and the more threat you feel is usually because we're attached to this idea of who I am. But and this is an Advaita expression as well, the I am that we tend to be attached to is the personality that you've developed, and all that's been put on you, sociologically, culturally, family of origin. And so some of that is not, you're carrying that weight, and some of it you're carrying it quite willingly. And so in meditation, we're just saying, well, just what happens if you just let yourself just put it beside, you don't have to get rid of it, right? Just put it beside you for a moment and notice what happens. And there's no threat there, because then you're like, well, okay, I will put it down. It's like this idea of being in an empty space with your schizophrenic self, which is how we normally operate. Because, I don't mean this in a totally negative
divided way. Yeah.
But it's, it's the sense of self that's driven by past, future. And that self is often multiple desires going on, and multiple split personalities. And we all operate a bit with that: the good person, the bad person, the anxious person, the happy person, whatever the split is, multiple splits that we all have. And so when we're sitting a little more steadily in the present moment, we can actually witness that self. And it's like, well, why? And then we can question, well, why am I holding on to this idea of who I should be or who I am, and why is that causing me such anxiety? And then as soon as you notice that, the anxiety just goes away. So,
when you come out of the meditation, do you still live within the personality? I mean, is the idea, can you live in the world and outside the personality? Well,
no, not entirely, because you are functioning as a biological being, and that you'll always have some measure of personality. The difference is something like having that personality driving the bus, white-knuckled grip, never letting go. Now, there's a certain point, and it sounds crazy, but there's a certain point, and think of yourself as not just the driver with the white-knuckle grip, you're also the person next to you, the passenger. You're also the person in the back having a sleep. And you're also the person in the other car. So ultimately there's no, think of this as a dreamscape. And in every dream, you're every little part of the dream, including, angel, devil, whatever factors are in the dream. You're kind of, because it's your dream landscape. No one else is there but you, ultimately. But And so often we position ourselves as the drive, and you've got to be driving because and that's horizontal time. I've got to get to the destination. Well, just stop driving for a bit. Like even in the analogy, you could park the car, because if you don't try, you're going to hit something. So you just park the car and just have a look instead, and look what's outside. So rather than just trying to get to the destination, look outside, see what the trees look like. Just stop for a moment. And when we do that, we no longer, I'm driving the bus. I don't, because we're afraid of crashing.
Yeah, I think that the real worry is, the worry is that if you stop, then nothing will happen in your life, or you'll do not. You'll sort of sink into a sense of lethargy and torpor, and
see, that's it. Pretty much, it never happens that way. In fact, when it's like, all right. I mean, there's a whole lot of analogies, but it's the same. Like they prove this in a whole lot of working conditions. People get regular breaks at a certain point, and just go and do something else and come back and work. 40 minutes, 10 minutes off, 40 minutes, 10 minutes, and the productivity just climbs by some ridiculous 300% or whatever the studies show. Whereas if you try and work 8 hours without any your productivity, some people can maintain that, but they're like in the top 0.1 percentile. The majority of people need you have the input, then go and do something else, go for a jog, do some yoga, come back, do the thing that whatever you're working on. And I mean, you can't always do that with certain projects or certain jobs but as a general rule of thumb. So it's the same thing here. So it's not like you then want to meditate. You can do it for periods of time, but it's not like you need to meditate for 10 hours a day. It's just that reference point of slowing down and stopping. And then you start driving again. But what starts to happen with horizontal time, every time we're seeing horizontal time like this. And then, so let's say I meditate for a bit, then I go back to horizontal time. And my meditation seems to have gone away. And I'm back to functioning in the personality again. And I was like, oh, fuck, all that peace is gone. Now I'm back to being this aggravated person who's, got my work and got my family and my life's a mess. Holy shit. And then you meditate again and it's like, oh, I feel better now. But it only happens when I meditate. If you really start paying attention there, it starts to translate back into horizontal time. And all of a sudden, it's like, I'm just indicating my hands. Here's vertical time. Here's horizontal time. So it seems like we do this and then that catches up. And then we do this and then that catches up. But over time, what happens is it's like, oh, horizontal time's happening and vertical time is never not there. Because there's no moment of your life that the present moment isn't there.
And you can do both at the same time.
It's not that you can do both. Both are happening at the same time, always.
What about
of everything else?
Can we take that back to like the practical example of someone doing yoga, for example? They want
they're fundamentally not separate. And this is key for Advaita Vedanta, which means not separate. Just as your mind and body are fundamentally not separate, right? They're inextricably linked, for better or for worse. This mind and this particular body, right? And so horizontal, vertical time. Just as we would say, observer consciousness and the experiences that it notices are not fundamentally separate. So you may want a bit of distance in order to observe, just because it's easier to observe when you're quiet and still, versus observing in the middle of an argument is difficult. Observing in the middle of traffic is difficult because the busyness is very distracting. But as you get used to this and you start moving forward, a sense of moving forward through horizontal time, vertical time is always with you. And it's only an instant away. There's no time between you going, oh, I was off in my head in a future projection. Oh, now I'm present. And as soon as you realize that is, oh, this awareness of spaciousness is always with me. Just because I'm doing this or that doesn't really matter. That spaciousness of consciousness is always available. Now that's great news, because all of a sudden I don't have to do anything special to be present. I don't have to be a special person. I don't have to be a special yogi and know what Mula Bandha is in order to be enlightened. Because that requirement is hellishly steep. And it's you know, it's absolutely abstract. Like people go, well, I've got to figure out what Mula Bandha is first. Then I've got to try and draw this energy up and pull it up to the crown chakra and keep it there. And it's so obtuse. People are like, you know, to this day, I've never met a single person who's claimed to have accomplished this. And so in a way, it's a foolish idea, because it means you have to do very special stuff as a perfected human being. And it's based on horizontal time, that idea.
A lot of learning. Yeah, a lot of progress.
It's like incredibly, you know, it's like, wow, you know, it's incredibly impractical in the end. And I'm sorry, anyone listening, if you're a staunch Mula Bandha practitioner, but
Kundalini expert.
Right. So just to finish off.
Okay. Yeah.
So the present moment is always with us. And so this is one of the fundamental non-dual ideas, is that when we start looking into who am I in this present moment, anything that you're capable of observing is something that you can let go into empty space. There's no danger. It's not a risk. It's not a problem. It's just that, well, and it's not that your personality disappears when you do that. It's just that I'm not leaning in the direction of horizontal time. I'm just turning back and allowing myself, while I'm meditating or just sitting, to just be in recognition of, in such a way that of the present moment, that the I I'm looking at, you know, because I'm looking towards, well, if everything else is falling away, my personality, even my mind, even thinking, even how I'm feeling starts to kind of filter back into the open space, which is, because I just said the present moment is a lot of open space. You've got choice, you can do this, you can do like this. It's infinite impossibility, the present moment. Anything can happen potentially, right? And so in that infinity, right, the I that I'm looking as becomes the same as the I as which I'm looking at. There's no fundamental distinction. So, and the I that I'm looking as in this case is not the mind, it's not the personality, it's just spaciousness in the sense, and I'll use this analogy for this kind of, because when I use the word nothing or emptiness, people can have a little...
Well, also, you kind of think, well, what benefit is that? Like, you kind of think, well, with all this space, if you don't have personal preferences and a personality, it's kind of useless.
Well, no, right? Think of it this way. Right. Think of it this way. If you had to try, and it's not an easy one, if you had to define some of the most loving experiences that you've had in your life, love in the most altruistic way that you could define it, it would be this that I'm saying. When, for example, and I've had these experiences with different people, right? Sometimes it's been a partner, sometimes it's been a therapist, sometimes it might be another yoga teacher, right? When you just meet each other and the other person is being unconditionally spacious towards you. They're just being so open to you that they're saying, whatever you do, I'm going to be okay with that. I'm going to be so open to you. And if you know what I'm talking about? Well, that's someone who's just dropping into just being open and present with no agenda. Well, that's the same thing. So the ultimate definition of love in that case, and I'm not talking about personal love, which is also a lovely and important thing, but I'm talking about love that's empty of need, desire, and future. It's the same. This is non-dual also. It's a kind of a love that is just saying, I'm open to this. And to another human being. I'm open to you. And if you get even a verbal statement like that from somebody, it floors you, because you're like, oh shit.
Can you exist in that state for much of the time, or do you just lay yourself open to all kinds of possible exploitation and abuse?
In a sense, but yeah, well, you could take it that way, but again, that's getting back into the dualistic reference, right? It's that in opening to the moment, in being aware of that, the concern about what happens next is not relevant, because whatever happens next, you then deal with that. And if what happens next means I protect you because a bus is going to hit you, well, I'll pull you out of the way of the bus. If it's coming at me, well, I'll jump out of the way of the bus. So it doesn't mean just because I'm in that non-dual state that I can't recognize a bus coming. I mean, because that, for the most part, you'll notice because it's loud and it's noisy, and you can hear it coming from a mile off. So you get out of the way. So it's not that the functioning of horror, these, like I said, these things are not separate, because otherwise, if you then go, well, I'll forget about that because now I have to deal with all the stuff in horizontal time. Once you start being aware of this, it's never separate from you. This infinite spaciousness that we all have access to. Even apparently, even animals have been said to be, I don't know, enlightened, but at least can be aware of something on that level. I think it's harder for animals because they tend to be much more reactive than a human is. Humans are bad enough, but animals are bad. It's just a normal function of biology to be reactive to certain stimulus, right? But humans have a particularly unique capacity to allow for both of these things simultaneously. So even if you're working on this horizontal achievement, whatever you need to work on, the present moment is always available. And in the present moment, this awareness of infinity is available to you. It's not...
And they can both happen at once.
Well, they are not can, they are both happening at once. Because otherwise the universe would cease to exist. If these two things were fundamentally separate, the universe is gone. We don't have a universe anymore. So I'm going to give you, I'll finish with 3 analogies, and that they all relate to the same thing. So first analogy, look around in the room, your room, not mine. Or you can look at my room if you want, but it's better. You look around in the room and you just notice some of the objects in the room. So your bed or a wall or whatever your bamboo thing is there, right? And you notice those objects, right? Is that the room? And the answer is no. They're the objects in the room. In any decent room, the majority of what's in the room, if you look around, the majority is nothing. Look at any room. Unless you've got it filled with newspapers and you're a bit of a crazy person. Any room you look at, look outside, look up in the sky. What mostly we see the sun or stars or clouds or trees, but mostly what's there is nothing.
Yes, but it's contextualizing its function by barriers.
Well, right, but it doesn't really matter. We don't notice empty space because it's not apparent, because it's empty space. What we notice is the next thing that's happened, and that's horizontal time. We notice the next thing because that's what we're trained to do. But empty space is always there because it's always there. Just as you look up in the sky, most of the time we go, oh, stars are so pretty. But as quantum physics has said very clearly, well, the majority, I don't know what the percentage is, I forget now, but the majority of the universe is nothing. Well, this is the same as our basic reality. The majority of you, and I mean this in the nicest, loving way that I can say it, the majority of you is nothing. And I don't mean nothing to mean you're not worth anything. I just mean you are also this lovely empty space. Yeah. And just by connecting to that, you kind of go, well, that's quite nice, because now, although I have responsibilities, I'm not tied into them in any kind of negative way. I'm just dancing with them because that's what I'm dancing with.
I suppose my question, it always comes back to with you, is how do you hold the two at the same time? How, like
just dance.
How do you hold the empty space and the wish for progress and the wish for alignment in one's yoga practice? Or
initially you're probably going to feel like a pendulum, like I got or a fence jumper. I'm on that side of the fence, or sitting on the fence and you get split. But they're not fundamentally separate. So I'll use another analogy, because otherwise, if you think you can't do both, it just means there's a sense of duality, which we all have, and that sense is normal. Just to feel like, well, they're separate, but they're not, because horizontal and vertical time are always inextricably linked. Because it's just time. It's the same thing. I'm just looking at it from one point of view or the other, but they're both simultaneously occurring always. You don't get one without the other. Right. I'll just use one more analogy. So we're looking at a screen right now. This is one of my favorites. This is from a gentleman called Rupert Spira, but it's a useful one.
I interviewed him. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a screen, and on the screen is the movie. Right now it's you and I talking. And so that's the movie that's playing. We're engaged with each other. We're talking. We're having a discussion on this subject. And so we see color. We see, we have a response to it. Now, the thing that's apparently dualistic is the screen and the movie. Now, the analogy here is you are both of those, right? You are the movie, which is your personality, your mind, your likes, your dislikes, all your peccadillos. Sometimes the movie's action. Sometimes the movies are a comedy. Sometimes the movies are drama. Sometimes you turn it off and the movie's black, you go to sleep. Right now, the movie, by your nature, we're enraptured by a colorful, dramatic movie. And at times we make it so dramatic, that's all we can see is a movie. That's what we're identified as. I am this fucking movie. And some people love it because the ego is a little bit too big. And some people hate it because it's like, well, I've been playing a very boring documentary for a long, long time, and I don't want to be in that damn documentary anymore. It's the Sahara Desert, something like that. And so you may detest your own movie. So, all right. So in this analogy, turn the movie off, and then you see now, if you were to cover this up, right, we would have a blank screen. Now they're not separate. You can't have the movie without a screen. But fundamentally, you don't need the movie necessarily. So the blank screen is actually the empty space that we're talking about. And that's fundamentally your present moment always. And your fundamental consciousness is that. It's not separate to itself. It's not schizophrenic in this, because it's empty and spacious, and it's allowing for whatever the next thing is. You're just looking and going, perhaps, hopefully, curiously going, oh, let's see what the next movie is, versus plotting it out.
Can the screen exist at all without the movie?
Yes. In fact, it does. Just literally, in this case, turn the movie off and you'll see.
And what's the relevance of existing without the movie?
Because initially what appears to happen is, I am the movie because that's what I'm identified with. That's what I notice. That's what's graphic for me. And again, whether it's a drama or a comedy, I'm the movie because, I'm this body, or I'm this mind, I am this personality. And so we're attached to that so graphically that we can't see that, well, I am also this empty screen. And when you notice that, the importance of the movie, however interesting, starts to have a different context, and we start to go, well, if I'm this empty space and you're this empty space, then what happens next? And there may be confusion about that initially, but what happens next is just time, and you get on with things and you do your job, but empty space is still, always there with you, kind of following you around. And an empty space in this sense, there's a whole lot of context for it in terms of what that might mean. And it just means, well, I was using this earlier analogy around all the little things that bug you, they're not going to be a problem anymore, because they're not going, because.
But even though you recognize your empty space, you still have objectives and aims.
Yeah, but the little things that come and go, they're not going to be a problem anymore. Then the other one, which is really interesting, the really big things, really huge things like global warming. You might be directly involved in that, but let's say you're like me and, we can see it from a bit of a distance, or the population problem, like, humans aren't having enough babies, and in 100 years we could be, so, there's all sorts of really serious problems, but they're so big. It's like, well, I'm just going to deal with my part of it. And so I'm not going to worry about that. And once you eliminate all the big problems and all the little problems, what's left is what you have to deal with, which you are totally equipped to dealing with, and therefore there is no problem in your life. And I'm not saying ever, I'm just saying any problem that shows up, you're able to deal with it with grace, with equanimity, not necessarily without struggle or without difficulty, but the level of flare, because you have this capacity.
Let's also talk about responsibilities, isn't it, and duties. But what about preferences and the stuff that makes life colourful? I mean, having goals and wishes and desires and those
things don't have to fall away just because you're being present. Some of them will, because like the little things and the really big things, you start to, well, some of that's just not that important for me to focus on right now. Like, because, you know, if you're so enraptured by all of the different facets of your personality and you have to fulfill all of them, most of that's just going to be an ego wish fulfillment thing, which is ultimately not that satisfying, because it's just about trying to, you know, boost yourself up bigger and bigger. And it's like, that doesn't, at the end of the day, most people just don't feel that great in that, you know, like you're always trying to be too self-important or too colorful or too, you know, one of the troubles that people initially have with quietness is that it seems boring.
That would be an obvious argument. Yes.
And yes, I understand that.
If life is meant to be lived, people will say, what is the point of all this awareness? Right.
So, and there's a couple of counter arguments to this, but one of them is, one of the reasons it's boring is because the kind of a low-level capacity to focus. Because if you're always enraptured by the big, loud noises, you basically are going to be a distracted person. Because as soon as there's something big and colorful, your head's going to spin around backwards and you're going to go look and chase after that. And whether it's a sexual fantasy or a new car or a new outfit because you look so gorgeous in that new outfit, you're going to be so distracted that you don't even have the tools yet to actually turn back and look at yourself. So you don't even know who you are, because the distraction is always going to be extreme. It's impossible that wouldn't occur with someone who's right. So anyone who's capable of a little bit looking back at themselves has a capacity to slow down, and the level of grasping and impatience with life is going to be less. That doesn't mean you won't be a colorful person. Like I've a lot of the meditation teachers I've met, very funny, the best ones, very funny, very engaging, interesting personalities. You want to talk to them. They've got such a depth and a character that is, you know, you gravitate. For me, I've gravitated to such teachers because they have such an interesting personality, and they're also quiet. They're not mutually exclusive. Just because you're being quiet doesn't all of a sudden mean, oh, now I'm boring. So one of the fundamental problems with being bored is you're someone who is distracted very, very easily, that's a problem. That's not a plus, it's a minus. It's not a good character trait. I had a second one there, but it escapes me. There is another, it might come back to me, but just yeah. No, anyway. No, it's okay.
How would people get into it? I mean, just to wrap it up, how would you recommend that people might start this field? You know what I mean? Like, the obvious question for the Advaita newbie is, who am I? Just sitting and meditate, you know, just sitting in a quiet space, asking the question, who am I? Is that what you've used? Or would you have any other recommendations for people?
No, well, I think if you're a yoga practitioner, and this is how I teach it, because I've gotten better at trying to give people a few steps to work on first, using horizontal time efficiently.
Yeah.
Because just to say, all right, now you're just going to sit and explore the I am, turn back and inquire into the nature of I, and that's it. And then people are just left floundering, going, oh man, this sucks. I don't like this, you know, I'm getting bored, or I'm getting frustrated, or, you know. So for yoga practitioners, the simplest is to start with the breath. And so this could be our third analogy, given that we've used a couple of others, right? And so breathing has a similar function. If we get too caught into long inhale, long exhale, kumbhaka, et cetera, those things are useful and interesting. But in terms of what actually all of the traditional breathing systems say, is those things are also just a distraction. Because it's like horizontal time, breathe in for longer or breathe out for longer, counting the breath. Again, they're useful things because they help to calm the nervous system. They also help to quieten the mind. So just long breathing is a big stepping stone toward meditation. So any kind of pranayama is good for that. But here's the important, it's not just an analogy, it's a method or an approach to practice. And this can happen in asana practice. So you do your salutes and notice if you're holding the breath all the time. Firstly, that brings anxiety. Second of all, it brings extra tension physically. So if you're holding the breath all the time, inhale, upward dog, hold the breath. Jump back, hold the breath. Move through, hold the breath. Even just a minor amount of, right? That level of tension increases both the physical pressure, but also the mental pressure. So whereas if you learn to breathe more efficiently in any vinyasa or pranayama practice, what you learn to do is inhale and then pause, not stop breathing, just pause the breathing. Just have a couple of seconds where you just empty of, even though you've inhaled, so you're not empty of air, but you just exhale, and rather than locking or holding or this conceptual contraction of Mula Bandha, just exhale and pause. Just wait a second, 2 seconds, not long. And then inhale again and just repeat the cycle. And at a certain point, those pauses are the same analogy, same idea as nothing. Because the pause is not an inhale, it's not an exhale, and it's not holding the breath. It's the fourth phase of breathing, clearly stated in Patanjali Sutra. What's interesting is most yoga teachers don't know it, don't teach it. And yet it's considered the most important pranayama to practice. And I find that wonderfully interesting. And this is Advaita Vedanta.
Which sutra is it in? If people want to look at that, do you know whereabouts it is?
Second pada. There are 4 pranayamas. When I forget the actual.
Yeah, okay. That part. Second pada. Yeah, at the end.
Right.
Yeah,
and so you have 4 pranayamas. Inhalation.
Inhale, exhale.
Exhalation.
Flow smoothly.
Kumbhaka,
That's yeah.
And none of the above, which is also Kevala Kumbhaka.
Okay.
Right, and Kevala Kumbhaka is considered the only one that's actually important to practice. And if you were to practice Patanjali's yoga, if there's one, in my opinion, one thing you practice, it's that, because that's the one thing he said you practice. Patanjali was not talking about practicing asana, nothing to do with any of that. It's a Raja Yoga style of meditation, which is a part of it would be geared around Kevala Kumbhaka. It's not that difficult. You just breathe and observe, don't stress the breath. But, let's say you were practicing pranayama, so you could have a long inhale, long exhale, but like I suggested, have a long inhale, but don't lock anything. Just pause at the end of it. And it could be 1 second, it could be 10 seconds, right? But there's no lock, there's no stress, there's no position that you're making. And because when you stop doing that, horizontal time falls away and vertical time, I'm just being spacious within my breathing practice. And in that spaciousness, you feel free, you feel light, you feel quiet, all of the things that we look for in yoga practice. Now, even doing a vinyasa, like a salute to the sun, you can potentially practice the same thing. If you're busy focusing on doing the whole time, there's this other function that's also occurring, which is the present moment. And it shows up quite clearly on the pause with each breath. Not locking, not kumbhaka, just inhale, just a little bit of space, just wait a moment. It's easiest in asana practice, it's easiest with things like forward bends, usually, just because of how forward bends affect the diaphragm and lung. But you can hold the foot, not everyone, but if you're a little bit flexible, you can hold the forward bend, just breathe in this way, where the exhale the exhale goes back into nothing. And when you become aware of that, so, I'm tuning into this present moment, nothing. And your consciousness starts aligning with it, even your body starts aligning with that. Like quantum physics says, when you meditate and you feel tingling along the fingers, or you feel, if you do Vipassana, you feel tingling here, Anapana. But these are the tingling, essentially electrons arising and passing. And so what you're witnessing with tingling is the impermanent nature of your body, the fact that it's just an arising and passing of electrons, and in between is mostly empty space. And so even within your yoga practice, you're capable of observing the body as this empty field of arising and passing, all right? And it's magical.
All right. Let's leave it there. That was good. That was good. I think
you would have had this experience, right? Just to confirm, right? You've done a long, strong yoga practice and you've laid down at the end of it. And when you feel, particularly when you feel like you've done a nice practice, but you feel like tingling going up your fingers or tingling going down, just when you're lying in Shavasana, that sense of energy moving through your body. That is a valid source of connection for both the tingling indicating horizontal time, the arising and passing of your physical body, but within that arising and passing is this awareness of empty space. It's not threatening, it's not killing you because you're alive while it's going on. And whenever we feel Shavasana like this, it's like, wow, this is wonderful.
So everyone has had this experience. It's just a question of recognizing and kind of
exactly
embodying the experience.
Sorry, go on. It's like when you see a good sunset and you really just sitting with the sunset and you just stop moving, even stop drinking, and just experience the sunset and do the same thing. You'll just drop into empty space and you go, wow.
Previously you were there with a beer, were you, in this conception? You're there.
Well, you're too many of those and you don't look at the sunset anymore. It's like, oh, all right. I mean, temporarily the beer helps you get there too, because it numbs you enough. It numbs you enough to feel like you're empty, you're spacious.
Exactly.
Why most people do drugs, because we're searching for that sense of open freedom.
For that space outside the personality. Yeah.
And we all have it innately. It's just that we often look in some odd places for it. It's a fair journey. Why not?
I think there's a part 3, but thanks, Mathew. That was really good. And I think we improved on our first one. And let us know what you think in the comments. And let's think about our part 3. All right. Thanks for your time, Mathew. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Cheers now. Bye now.